How is buying a house like going cross-culturally? We'll answer that question in Cross-Cultural, a critical piece in BAM delivery and disciple making. You need the biggest picture you can get as you go culture to culture. Do you like to hear it straight? Have it all boiled down to straightforward numerics? You know, many culture pundits feed into this and can lead you to think there are A cultures, B cultures, C cultures. So you just say, oh, I'll just adjust my thinking to that. Or you say, oh, I see, I need to learn these 10 basic culturally different behaviors, the handshake, etc. But look, here's your first concern. Remember this priority. You don't want to be superficial. You don't need to be able to describe culture. You need to be able to work in it. You need to be able to work with other culture people. You need to really understand them. In this session, I'm not going to do a heavy-duty theory of cultural awareness. If you want that, check out the 4-page PDF, Sources for BAM Coaches Workers, and read the basic books and the upscale theory books. I highly recommend that. Go online and learn what experts call the culture dimensions, or read information about culture-specific things in the country you're going to or want to work in. Or give me a call. I'm happy to talk about these things. But today I'm going to elaborate a couple questions that are always raised, and these are behind-the-scenes questions. How you answer them, how you operationalize those answers in a moment of cultural encounter with someone from another culture, that's cross-cultural skill. That is, let me say it again, how you operationalize those behind-the-scenes answers to the important behind-the-scenes questions in a moment of cultural encounter with someone from the other culture. That's cross-cultural skill. The central question of the video series is about difference as you go from your home culture to an other culture. Is there substantive difference in how they think and act? Yes. Do they perceive a substantive difference in how you think and act? Yes. Well, how will you deal with the difference of others? And how will you deal with yourself, who other culture people perceive as different? Is there such a thing as bad culture? That's our second question. You may say, well, their difference is bad. They have bad culture. They do strange things because there's something bad about their culture. Well, is it just different or is it bad? Well, it's both, and we'll get to that. And the third question is crossing cultures about conflict resolution. Well, yes, it is. You can enjoy many of the differences and hope in the good news as you face their evils. But if you really engage the other culture, then you'll find yourself in an almost immediate conflict with them. Nice as you are, you will know that something doesn't fit with your perception of sane reality. You may have heard Nancy Adler's story about the Scottish businessman's encounter with a Japanese businessman. When one evening after a meal in the Scots hotel room, the Japanese businessman asked, "Can I sleep with you?" What was the Scot to do? What would you do? Well, the Scot recounts the details and his own emotional turmoil, but he wisely said yes. As it turns out, for the traditional Japanese, one of the great compliments you can be paid is for the host to ask, "Can I sleep with you?" This goes back to feudal times. What the invitation really said was, "I trust you with my life. I don't think you'll kill me while I sleep. You're my friend." To say no to the invitation is an insult. I don't trust you not to kill me while I sleep. The outcome in this instance was a long-term business relationship. There's a difference between perceived and real. And in an other cultural setting, you have to have skill and wisdom in figuring out what's what. Today I'm going to give you a 3-arrow graphic and compare cultural encounters to buying a house. Stick with me, there's an important point here. Other teachers use graphics like icebergs, onions, concentric circles with a core, and you can learn about those elsewhere. They're worth studying. Read Livermore on the iceberg or Donald K. Smith on the onion. These are great descriptive pictures of culture. But first, back to house buying. And the question that we've raised, is there substantive difference in how they think and act in the other culture? So doubtless you've bought a house. How's that work? So we'll consider the 3 parts of house buying. You as a buyer have your ideal house in mind. That's the first part. And then some negotiation action for the seller's house takes place. That's the second part. And finally, the third part, you own a real house. So part 1, you decide you'll look for the ideal house. And the house you have in mind. Where you get the idea for your ideal house is from multiple sources. And I'm going to give you 9. There are dozens more. You want something like or very unlike what you grew up in. So that's number 1. Or maybe you got your idea from Architectural Digest. Or thirdly, from a spouse with good taste. Or fourthly, from friends' houses or houses in the neighborhood that you looked at. 5, another source of your ideals may be you visited Spain or Santa Fe and you liked what you saw. You like Spanish style. 6, well, you're not going to live in a shack. You're an upper middle class American, so location's important. Or your dad taught you about functional, frugal, and solid construction. You want something like that. That's ideal for you. Someone else said to you, this is our 8th thing, always buy on high ground. Or you once saw an uncle, 9th, gain or lose value for his money. Okay, so let's try to take those things and boil them down a bit further. Where did you get the idea for your ideal house? So multiple sources over multiple years, maybe from your whole life, from your heritage and what your parents said. It's from history and family. Or it's from friends and neighbors and community standards, something a bit wider, networks, stated and unstated rules. That's what those are, friends and neighbors and community standards. Or you got them from information sources, so you study those Architectural Digest, etc. Or you got them from the experiences. Or you got them, and you may not even remember those experiences, but you got them, or you got them from economics, your own sense of bang for the buck, so from economics. These ideal values are deeply embedded in you as you go to buy a house. Maybe you don't recognize where they came from, but you know what you want. Okay, so there's another part to this acquisition of the house. Your realtor takes you to 17 houses, and you think you found it. You decide to put a bid in on the house number 15. The house inspector gets involved. You go back and forth on who fixes what. There's all sorts of craziness about credits and time, how old the heater is. You sort that out, and then you go to settlement. The only thing about this part of the house buying description that has to do with my cultural analogy is that they're living people working out a deal. It's not just about your idea of what you want, your ideal of what you want, nor is it just about what we're about to talk about in a moment, about what the house really is and its nooks and crannies and potential glory and potential leaks. The house buying thing is human. It's about how humans deal and perceive and resolve. This is very important. At its core, realtors know this, it's a very human process. So that's all I'll say about that for now. The third part is now you own the house. What is it? It was the seller's. You're happy. It's never ideal, is it, eh? But you wouldn't have bought it unless it reflected your values, your ideal, in great respect, probably. So this is a real house. Now you own a real house. You and everyone can see it. You can touch it, smell it. It has the tiled roof in the Spanish style you wanted. It's open concept, so the kitchen and the family room flow together, and there's lots of light. It's got 4 of the 5 bedrooms you wanted. You took that. One's a magnificent master suite. Well, it doesn't have a guest suite, but a great master suite. It's got granite countertops and stainless steel appliances you had in mind. Not quite the room in the kitchen you like, but it's great. The entertainment space on the lower levels, big enough for a game area, for ping pong table, for some theater-like seating. It's in the township next to the semi-rich people, so maybe a little glitch in your status, but the taxes are lower and the schools are good. The list goes on. The house is the reality. What you see is what you own, and it reflects your ideals. You get the picture. So now here's the connection. When cultural worlds collide, you'll have to interpret both the reals and the ideals. And simultaneously, like in the part of house buying where you haggled about the heater and eventually went to settlement, you'll be doing human stuff, building relationships. There's a huge human element. So while at the same time you're looking at the real things, material things, visible objects, people interacting, events and meetings, environments, colors, food, chairs in a row or not, the things that science would get into. And while you're trying to understand the ideals, the values that produce these things, there's that other part. There's people you will be engaging. So here's our defining instructional arrow graphic. In the diagram, the green arrow represents what you can see and perceive. It's the real house. And the blue arrow represents invisible values. It's like your ideal house. So you show up in the other culture, and what do you see? Answer, their real house. You can observe it, hear it, touch it, taste it, smell it. You can measure it, count it, record it. But there's also the blue arrow, which represents their values. Their real culture looks the ways it does because of the ideals. The ideal values are deeply embedded in the people of the culture and the objects, processes, and habits of their culture. Sound familiar? They had an idea of what kind of house they wanted, and they bought it, and that's what you're looking at. Their ideals, this blue arrow in this diagram, came from multiple sources over a number of years, maybe their entire history, from their heritage and what their parents said, did, and taught, from friends and neighbors, from community standards, from their political and economic philosophy, from the blessings and constraints of their environment, from their sense of good economics and work ethics and practices, from their experiences over time as a community together. And maybe they don't recognize where those ideals came from. Some of them, yes, some of them not necessarily, but they know what they want. It's sort of built into them. And all that's represented by the green arrow. They're working out what they mean in the reality of their culture. With your naked eye, you can't observe the history or experiences or family values of the culture. But you can use your senses to see and perceive the schools and the mosques, the art and the music, the food and the fashion, the language and the looks on their faces. Just remember, even though you'll never see the ideals with your naked eye, that blue arrow is there. Yet, when you show up in the other culture, you can't see it. If this were a game, I'd tell you, yeah, go there and try to find the blue arrow. Figure out what's behind all that you see. What's underneath the surface? The meaning of the green arrow is hidden in the invisible blue arrow. The meaning of the things you see is hidden in the invisible things you don't see. Meanwhile, something else happens when you show up in the other culture. When you show up in the other culture, you're not only immediately seeing the reality, you're interacting with the other culture people. The relational arrow pops up. You're relating to the people who know how to live in their culture. It was built on their values and the material culture there. How people deal in the marketplace or celebrate an event, the color of their currency, the products they have on their shelf, the condition of their transportation, the gesture or words they use to say goodbye, all is a reflection of their values. Do you get that? That these are the people with ideals who live in a unique, real material world that reflects their ideals, which came from their history and experience, their chosen sense of style, their parents and community, their learned sense of right and wrong, their sense of how to work, etc., built into them commonly across time. Yet, you're pretty blind to all that when you first arrive. Nevertheless, you have to interact with and communicate with these people. They are a significant way to understanding. Their way in to their patterns of culture, their ways of doing business, their day-to-day habits, their cultural common sense, as it were. Their love of open floor plans and hardwood floors and granite countertops. Or maybe instead, their love of a freshly boiled lamb. Or of no one working during the day between noon and 3 p.m. The relational is the foundation you will build as you engage their culture. It's immediately upon you. It's inevitable. It's important. You'll be relating to the other culture people in their real material world and in the world of their ideal meanings. The meanings they attach to the material world they live in can be very significant to them. Consider this. So, two parties having a conflict about a boundary line, perhaps a national border. It's something that can be seen and established. You look at it on a map, you can maybe look at it in a field and say it goes between these trees and that mountain. In the discussion over where that line is, real resources or wealth, material things, may be at stake. Yet even more significant are the meanings people attach to those real material resources. Those might include invisible values such as national identity. We have oil, pride, belonging, or security. So the meanings people attach to those real material resources may be even more significant than the things themselves. Okay, let's move on. We're going to talk about our second question about bad culture. So if the inclination among the local culture is to sneak out at night and move the boundary lines and then in the morning act like nothing happened, that's just plain bad. Evil, deceitful, morally corrupt. Now we know for certain there is no one good. No, not one. An egalitarian American who reads the Bible like we do, we are sometimes prone to reducing everything to good and bad. Yet we know for sure that there's lots of bad in American culture. And yet there's some really good stuff. And it's the same way in the other culture. Again, we can come together and discuss a lot of the theory of this. I'm just trying to get the basic stuff that's sort of behind the scenes. We know this. It's the same way in the other cultures. Some good stuff, some bad stuff. God in his wisdom has allowed this other culture to flourish in ways your culture does not. Why do they emphasize or focus on certain things? What are their priorities? What is the church's vision in this place? Meanwhile, the distortions of sin in their system, has produced unique distortions. Even as there's some unique good there, there's some unique evil there. The weeds of sin may look different in the other culture than they do in your culture. So yes, both bad culture and differently bad culture. So simultaneously, you must consider that men made in the image of God collectively reflect his image in their culture. This can be a gold mine, perspectives and wisdom you've never before imagined. Let yourself be informed, perhaps made wise by what this other culture thinks of as true and honorable, just and pure, and lovely, and commendable, and excellent, and worthy of praise. You can critique your spouse for all his or her faults sins, and we often get mired in that. But brothers and sisters, don't neglect to remember and see the beauty that won your heart. There are some basic principles at play here as you cross cultures, like taking the bad culture log out of your own eye. Well, I hope you get that. Is it just different, or is it bad? You may be tempted to start by thinking they're wrong, it's not right, this is chaotic, they've started in the wrong place. You might think that at any moment. You might think it generally, but you might think it about some particular things. And as you begin to view in this way, hold on, look at yourself and say, this is not the same as I am used to. This is uncomfortable, but I'm going to withhold judgment. I'm going to reflect on this. I'm just going to take it all in and reflect on it. I'm going to withhold judgment. This leads us to question number 3 that we mentioned before. Is crossing cultures about conflict resolution? Well, difference will lead immediately to conflict in your own way of thinking and feeling. And it works the other way too. The other culture's way of thinking and feeling about you and your ways, when they sense your difference, there will be some conflict brewing inside them too. Back to the arrow diagram. But here, let's start with the relational arrow, which is the active day-to-day relationships, interactions, communication, interdependence that you will build and have, or not, across the time you invest. Remember the blue arrow of meaning? It's another way to say there's much intricate, invisible common sense in every culture. Americans act in ways that make sense to them, but they can't always explain why. It's ordinary behavior driven by experiences, history, family, social networks, environment, teaching, values, etc. It's the way for everyone. It's that same way for everyone in every culture. Others have their other culture common sense, shaped and mixed differently from the same list. Experiences, history, family, social networks, environment, teachings, values, etc. But shaped and mixed in a different sort of way. So it's only the green arrow that you can really see and perceive what science can do. Material things and behaviors you can, those things you can look at. But even though they may look the same as they do in your culture, they may mean something different. You know, I look like an Englishman when I lived in England, but I sometimes had to remind my Pakistani friends, you know, I'm not an Englishman. I'm an American with all the liberties. The trick is the underlying meaning. The blue arrow, their ideal meanings may be the same as yours, or they may be entirely different. So you can be a Chicago Bulls fan with a face painted red and black, ready to look for a big win, and with some other bodily coverings to match. But in Ghana, if you wear those same colors, red and black, that means you're ready for a funeral. So the meanings are different, even though the things that you see are the same. Well, to summarize, in essence, we live with each other day to day on the relational arrow. And among the things and behaviors, the green arrow, the material things that we can see and perceive. And we, with everyone else, live in an ideal world where we cannot see or perceive directly. There's things behind the scenes that we're always trying to understand. It's like this. Imagine a network of roads and cars in motion. A clover leaf. That's one culture, and it's invisible to your culture. But your culture, you also have an invisible network of roads and cars in motion. It's those two things coming together in the very same space and time, based on entirely different rules derived from that same list: experiences, history, family, social networks, environments, teaching values, etc. This is the problem of crossing cultures, and it touches business and work. One immediate business application is this. You may get to a point in the other culture where you think you've gotten all the material ducks in a row, structures, systems, laws, policies, such that you and your other culture associates, as you meet them and engage them, say, well, yes, this is what we all want, and this is the way we want to operate. However, if at the meaning level, the ideal level, the understandings or misunderstandings, then the ducks aren't really in a row, and that'll soon come to the surface. Or if your relational interactions are askew, they're not right, they're not adequate, they're not trustworthy, then the ducks aren't really in a row, and that'll soon come to the surface. Here's a quote: "You can't improve collaboration until you've addressed the issue of conflict." Say Jeffrey Weiss and Jonathan Hughes in a Harvard Business Review article profoundly titled, "One Collaboration, Accept and Actively Manage Conflict." So today, as we've looked at those three parts of buying a house, this is what we've covered. You can see and perceive real material things and behaviors. The meanings of those may be different from your common sense as you go and look in the other culture. And as you go into the other culture, you'll immediately interact with people. And doing that's very important. You know, within a culture, we've said there's evil. The culture's built by the people. And that's confusing. It's very distracting. But meanwhile, we're going to try to understand what's different but ordinary and good in that other culture. And finally, the reality of conflict exists because other culture people hold on to their basic default differences, just like we hold on to our basic default differences, which we perceive as sane reality. They aren't the only ones who are culturally other and different. In cross-cultural BAM, in cross-cultural business's mission, culturally, these are the bottom line challenges. And I believe you can learn to figure them out and learn to engage genuinely and productively in your cross-cultural encounters.